Welcome back to another episode of the Lawyers in the Making podcast. I'm your host, as always, Nate Crespo, and today we have another amazing guest. He's currently a 2L at Pennsylvania Carney Law School, or Carey Law School, sorry about that, and has held past positions as a 1L summer associate at Manco, Gold, Catcher, and Fox, and as an SEO law fellow at Vincent and Elkins. Happy to have him on the show today, Mr. Ted Gomez. Welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today?
Hi Nate, thank you so much for having me. It's a great day so far. Really excited to dive into law school and all things law with you today.
Well, I'm absolutely ecstatic to have you on here today. Now, Ted, before we get started, can you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Sure. So again, my name's Ted Gomes. I'm originally from Brazil. Moved around a lot my whole life. Ended up in Pennsylvania with law school. I'm a second year law student at the University of Pennsylvania Carey Law School. We recently switched from just Penn Law to Penn Carey. We received a huge donation from the Carey Foundation, which is hence why our name has changed. But yeah, and I'm really excited to be here, really excited to talk about law school. I'm, going to really just dive into anything you want, Nate. Just really excited to help people that are thinking about law school, that are on the fence about it, but also those that are in law school currently, and anything that I can kind of give as advice. I'm really excited to do that.
Well, absolutely lovely. Now, let's go all the way back to the wonderful year of 2019. You were a Texas A&M University graduate. You graduated in political science, and then a year later, you would end up at UPenn Law. So, what sort of factors went into why you went to law school? Why'd you do it? Plain and
Yeah,
simple.
great question. And just kind of adding a little bit to that, once I got to 2019, I did finish out college, but then I took 3 years. So I did get some work experience before law school. I was at Teach for America teaching fifth graders and sixth graders, which honestly ties a lot into law school and we can talk about it. But on the first part, so I finished college, and I went to teach, and I knew I wanted to go to law school before I became a teacher. For me, it was first I decided to take a few years because it was COVID, and I was really scared about going to law school through Zoom. That was a huge part of it. That's a I was approached by a recruiter actually when I was finishing up at A&M. I knew I wanted to go to law school. I was ready to kind of start applying actually. People kept telling me, you got to take your LSAT your junior year of college. You got to take your LSAT your junior year of college. And I kept hearing that. And I decided I decided to start studying for the LSAT, but then a recruiter for Teach for America approached me and said, "Hey, we love the work that you're doing, kind of with this nonprofit that I helped start with a few friends, and we want you to go teach." And I first said, I'm going to law school. Thank you so much for reaching out. I appreciate it. I'll think about it. And I said that I'll think about it, but I was kind of ready to just decline that opportunity and start studying for law school, but at the end of the day, Nate, I don't know if I mentioned, but I'm originally from Brazil, so I don't have, I guess, this idea of like schooling here in the U.S. is so different from Brazil. And when I moved here, I moved during first grade, and I just had fantastic teachers that really helped me learn English. And if it wasn't for them, I truly wouldn't be in law school right now. And so I thought about that, and I realized, you know what? I do think that work experience prior to law school can be important for some people. Some people, they go straight through and they're just fine. But I think the 3 years that I took personally, was really important to me, and helping the kids, and even though I was a teacher during COVID, that was really hard. I felt like it really helped me as I kind of jumped into law school. So to answer your initial question is, I knew I wanted to go to law school. My mom is barred in Brazil, so she never actually practiced law. But I knew that was the goal, and I kind of veered off that path for a couple of years, but always as a teacher, still thinking, I'm going to be here for 2, 3 years, and then I'm going to apply to law school. And to be honest with you, it gave me a lot of time to study because as a teacher, you do have your, August to May, but really that May to August, I guess, period where teachers do get their summers. I used that opportunity to study, and that really helped.
Yeah, that's really important experience to sort of tell everyone about because it exemplifies even further that there really is no straight path to the law school. Just like yourself, you took that 3 year gap. People telling you got to take the LSAT junior. I took my LSAT, I was telling you before. I got a 151. I was very unhappy about that, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And the big reason why I made this podcast was to really figure out for myself, as well as the people who have since reached out to me, telling me that they're in the same situation. They're trying to figure out why they would go to law school. Like, why should I even do it? And it's really important for people to hear that, to take that gap, take those 3 years, be able to sort of really make and cement that decision. But I have to ask from that, through your teaching experience, that you were an elementary school teacher at Richardson Independent School in the Richardson Independent School District, and then you were a middle school teacher at Prosper ISD. How did those experiences sort of change your perspective, or sort of shape the person that you are before you got to law school?
Yeah, that's a great question. It when I think of you make so many decisions in life, and I think this was one of the best decisions I ever made. Uh, Not only to, as I kind of mentioned, the kids that I worked with, in Richardson especially, were very low income. We had 64% of our students were ESL students, so English as a second language, and they really needed help. I mean, I had students that came into my classroom in fifth grade, but were at a second grade or first grade reading level. And I will say, when and I get this question a lot about, like, how, especially in interviews, how did your teaching experience, how does that translate to law? And one of the big things I talk about is you have to be so organized as a teacher. You have to be very patient with your students. You have to realize that you have students that are so far below where they're expected to be at the grade level that you're teaching, that you really have to transform your lesson plan, and you have to do it with patience and kindness. And you know, there's so many traits that I think about. Like, when I get calls from students that are applying to law school right now, either they're applying through the SEO program, or they're just applying to law school. And I went to school with them at A&M. And one of the big questions they ask is, should I take a few years off? And I think it's very personal to each individual, and there's financial kind of situation. There's a financial kind of side of it that you have to look at as well. But for me, I think that, in my opinion, taking those years off were really important for my growth. I say that the kids taught me a lot more than I could ever teach them, because I you really get a sense of, like, life outside of your bubble, right? Like, for me, I've had it so well. My parents were able to help me pay for my undergrad, and I just see that my parents have made almost every decision in their life kind of, how do I make my kids' lives better, and how can I get them into the schools and that they need to go to? And a lot of my students just don't have those choices, and their parents are working 2, 3 jobs. And so I will say, structure, they didn't really have a lot of structure at home, and they felt like school was their structure. And you become a teacher, but you also become a mentor. And I will say, you know all of those skills, the organizational skills, the kind of patience you have to have with students, the way that you say things to kids, right? I don't want to say it's the same, but when you have a client and they walk into your law firm and they've got a problem, like, you have to find a way to, how do you talk to them to reassure them that you're going to get this job done for them? It's not the same, but when you're a teacher, there's so many things that happen so quickly that you have to manage. And I think that's kind of how it works in law too. Like, problems arise, and problem solving is a huge skill to have. And so teaching really helped me do all that. But organization, I think number one, right? Lawyers have to be organized, and teachers are I would say I was organized before, but after being a teacher, you really have this different side of what organization means and how it should be done. So I hope that answers your question.
No, that was an absolutely exceptional answer. I think you made so many great points there. You talked about how important it is to be have that sort of adaptability in any sort of situation, especially with dealing with kids. I mean, in part, you're shaping these kids in what you do every day in the year that you have them, that, going forward, that, the sort of ideas, the sort of tools that you give them will be used for the rest of their lives. So I thought that was a really important point, and as well the fact that as much as going into law school, you think about the law, you think about it's about cases and about being in trials and getting these decisions. It's also as much a very human industry. There's so much people operating that you have to do on a daily basis, just like you said, speaking to a client. So I feel that having that experience as a teacher will be so beneficial for yourself as well as others, just in sort of being able to handle people and being able to direct and put them in the right direction. But let's go to the first year of law school in 2022 at UPenn. People always say it's very dramatic. Some people really like it. Some people love it. What was it for you?
Yeah, 1L is definitely one of the most stressful times, I think, for law students. I think 2L and 3L, you kind of know what you're doing, but 1L is really trial by fire. I think there's so many opinions about how to do 1L. There's so many opinions about how should you outline, how do you meet people? How do you join organizations? Do you not? And I think for me, it was finding a good group of friends. I think that's really important. I was reading on I was on Reddit kind of before law school, and I kind of got out of that Reddit world because I think it can be very toxic. But it's fun, and it can be toxic too. But I think one of the things that I read a lot about was, okay, well, when you get to law school, you're going to wake up at this time, you're going to do this, and you're going to do that, and you're going to really focus on yourself. And I didn't see a lot of I didn't see a lot of advice about how your support system can be not your lifeline, but it can be such a huge thing. And I think for me, it was finding a really great group of friends right off the bat during orientation. And I know that's not how it works for everybody. I know that's not how people kind of intend to do things sometimes, but for me, it was just finding a good group, and I did. And then um when it comes to friends that become best friends. I have a great group of friends that kind of stemmed from just outlining. Like, hey, do you guys want to outline? And it's so funny because you create this bond in the beginning that you don't realize, like, you're with these people all the time. Like, you really get to you really get to experience all of law school. I mean, at least you're 1L with them. And so I got really close with that group, the group that, hey, let's outline. And then it became truly like we were spending so much time together that we became best friends. We helped each other through practice exams. We outlined together. We would eat lunch almost every day together. And these are people that you really, you take on as friends for life. And I think that's such an important thing that I think people miss sometimes about 1L, because they're so focused on getting that grade to get that job. And then I think some people forget about making friendships. And at the end of the day, if you don't do that, I think your 1L experience or your law school experience, like, you're missing out on making connections with people all throughout the law school. It could be your best friends, it could be just friends in general that are, later going to be your clients, that are later going to be people, and just again, I think less of it is how are they going to be an asset to you later on, but how can they be an asset to you during law school? And I think that that's a huge part for me. So I would separate it, right? You ask a very broad question about just how was it? And I think I'll be honest with you. I think with Penn, I just had no idea what to expect. You think of Penn, I thought of Penn as, this Ivy League law school that's going to be very stuck up and people are going to be very much on the Ivy kind of, where did you go to school? I went to Harvard, where did you, and all that stuff. And I didn't know how people were going to be. I'll be honest with you. I only knew Texas really in the second part of my life. And so coming here, I was pleasantly surprised by how friendly people were, by how, collaborative everybody was, everybody sharing outlines, everybody, hey, you didn't go to class today? I saw that you didn't come to class today. Here's my notes and things like that. And I just found it way more social than I thought it'd be. And I don't know why I had this in my mind that it wasn't going to be social, that it was going to be cutthroat. And it's not the same experience that I hear from others in other law schools, about how cutthroat, how cutthroat it can be, or, how some friendships seem to be more, transactional than anything. But yeah, so one L is really difficult. I think anybody that thinks it was easy, good for them. I found one L to be very difficult. I think maybe even taking the 3 years off as a teacher, there's so many things that I gained, but then going back to that, there's so many things that I think I lost. I lost that rhythm of studying. I lost that rhythm even of reading really dense material because, when you're teaching fifth and sixth graders, you're not really reading like very dense, materials. And so I think getting back on track of studying and reading was difficult for me particularly. And I think that reflected a little bit on my like fall grades compared to my spring grades. Like my spring grades were so much better. And I think that stems from having a semester under your belt and being able to kind of, all right, I know what I'm doing here. Penn offers 2 electives in the spring as well. And so you kind of feel a little bit more ownership over your law school studying, right? When you're able to actually pick some of the courses that you're taking. And I think that gives you some autonomy that you don't have in the fall as well. So, yeah, that's kind of how I characterize it. It's hard. I think anybody going into law school, I really think that you have to know that going in, it's going to be a really difficult, at least first semester. And you know what? Second semester was actually a little more difficult than the first in terms of time management because we have in the spring semester, you have a brief due. We had a summary judgment brief due that you don't have in the fall. You have a memo due in the fall. So it was a little bit harder, but you kind of know what you're getting into in the spring semester.
Yeah, I think you made a lot of great points there. I think the sort of the idea of having a very good support system around you of those friends, of those best friends even that they would further on become, just having that around you, it's great. It's just great for you as a person because, obviously as much as we can't forget about our mental health, we can't forget about our physical health. And I think a lot of the times, when you're focusing so much on getting that grade, getting that job, that we kind of forget about ourselves a little bit and just focus so much on the school. I mean, once again, I don't have any experience with that. I've never been to law school before, but I've talked to not enough people, but I've talked to many people about it at this point to know that having that support system is so utterly important because it just keeps you afloat. People can cover for you. If you miss something, it's no worry. It takes away a lot of the stress that there could be. So I thought that was a very important point that you made. But what I have to ask is, what were some important things that you learned in your 1L, in terms of just skills that you gained and sort of any other things that you learned through your experience there?
Yeah. Well, I think number one is thinking on your feet, right? We can talk a little bit about cold calls and kind of what people think about it. But it one thing you'll notice in law school is that at least 1L specifically, your fall semester, you have your doctrinal classes and this is the first time, at least in my kind of education where I felt like I was reading something and then I was going to be quizzed on it on the spot, ready to go. And I think that really, and I don't think that's going away ever. You know, some people are like, oh, I wish cold calls they could just get rid of those or something. But I think that's not going away. And I think thinking on your feet and thinking critically is a skill that you really only that I've learned by messing up and in multiple ways, right? Like messing up in the sense of like I didn't read that day and then I got called on and I have to say, I can I go tomorrow? Whatever. And kind of going through that moment. But then also being ready and then being told like, no, this might not be it. Or having a good answer and being like, wow, okay, I really do think I learned this. But at the end of the day, I think law school, your first semester, the cold calling, I think is important in the sense that it does keep you motivated, you can say positively or negatively, to really stay very on top of your reading, and I think that's important. Another skill that I think I've learned is being able to hear different perspectives within the classroom. I think 1L has less discussions than there should be. I thought of law school and the Socratic method as like students giving discussion points and kind of going not against each other, but kind of arguing against each other. And you don't really, at least I didn't see that much in my 1L year. And I think it's more geared towards seminars towards your 2 and 3L year. But I think you just have to be prepared to listen and in just being engaged, right, during the conversation, during the lesson, during law school. I think it can be easy with the challenging topics to feel, either one-sided on a certain issue, especially when you talk about constitutional law. But I think that at the end of the day, listening to different perspectives, and people are so smart, like a lot of my colleagues and classmates, they're just so brilliant and they have so much that they can add to a certain conversation that I think one thing I learned too is just listening to them and seeing what they can bring to the table and their thoughts and their arguments. I think that's important. I think another thing about law school that I learned is time management. Even as a teacher, I think that wasn't something that I did as well as I should have. But I think in law school, you have to learn how to time manage, and people do it differently, right? People do um, decide to do a 9 to 5. Some people decide. I work really well at night, so a lot of my reading was done at night. And some people can't function at night, right? They're in bed by 7, 8 o'clock, and so I think finding that rhythm for yourself is really important in law school. And there's just so many issues, and this is kind of my last point. There's so many things that you learn during your first year of law school that some people might have had in high school, a business law class or a constitutional law class. I had none of that, and so I think for me, one of the big things that I learned is that a lot of information is going to get thrown at you, and you have to filter. You have to learn how to filter. You have to kind of separate what are the facts of this case versus what's actually important, and how does this case shape, how is this case precedential, and how does it shape the next case, and that's hard. And it's hard because you want to learn everything, but you can't, right? It's law school. A lot of material gets thrown at you and in a lot of different ways. And so you have to filter out what's important, what's not. And that's a skill that you learn throughout law school.
Yeah, I think the 4 points that you made were very good in, being having time management, being able to manage your time, being able to know your strengths at when you work well, when you work the most efficient. I'm very good. I'm an early morning guy, so I like getting all my stuff done as quickly as possible in the morning. And, at night I like to, relax a little bit more, get a book, read something. That's my kind of thing to do. Doing the homework. It's a phrase I have now adopted for myself, and clearly it's reflected very well in law school. It's very important to do the homework in the sense of everything in life, especially in doing this podcast, in preparing for everyone, just learning as much as possible about people. Not too much, though. I think that's also something I learned as well. because you don't want to learn too much for a podcast because it kind of devolves into more of an interview than a conversation. Because if I know too much, then I know the answer you're going to say. I'm always thinking about the next question. It's just something I picked up on. I listen to podcasts about podcasts. It's a very interesting concept. Um, but listening to others is a very important point that you made as well. I always pride myself on being a student for life. There's always opportunities to learn from absolutely everyone, and that's something absolutely, I feel like I've taken for granted a lot of my life. But the past year or two, I've definitely sort of dug my feet in and really tried to employ that sort of maxim, be able to use that for the rest of my life, be able to talk to people and have these very efficient conversations, but draw out some deeper truths about people, because everyone has something to offer. Absolutely every person on this planet. So that's a really important as well. And finally, filtering information is something that I have especially learned through my experience in doing this podcast. There's so much information. I love the internet. My favorite thing in the world. It's how I started this podcast. I just typed in how to do a podcast and it gave me all this stuff. But it's a lot more information than you probably need. So going through that, being able to sort of decipher what you need, what you don't need, especially in those dense sort of cases, being able to read and find the stuff that you need for class and that you need for the future is really, really important points. Now, I have a two-part question here. So first, this past summer, you worked as a 1L summer associate at Manco, Gold, Catcher, and Fox. And my second question is, do you know what you want to do with the law going forward?
Yeah, so Manco is a fantastic firm. It's an environmental, mostly focused on litigation in the environmental world. And they're I would say a mid-sized to smaller law firm. They have about 35 different attorneys, which is considered pretty small. And what I loved about it is they really push this idea of family and push this idea of law obviously is your profession, but it was what amazed me about them is how much they knew about each other, how much they knew about their families. And you can do that, I think, at a smaller firm. We had every Tuesday, it was an 8-week internship, and every Tuesday we had it was called Tuesday firm lunches. And so every single person from Joe Manco, who started the firm, he's retired now, but he still comes to the Tuesday lunches, all the way down to all the associates and the interns, and we're all there in a room, and we just talk. And sometimes we had a presentation from someone from, like, I think one time we had a judge come and talk to us. We had a few people from industry and consulting kind of side of environmental come talk to us. We had an environmental engineer come and talk to us about PFAS, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but it's like the forever chemicals and all the litigation that's going on with that. And so Manco specifically gave me such a great opportunity to learn about not only litigation, but also um, how to work with partners directly. Because the reality, Nate, is that when you become a summer associate, a lot of times you work under the associates, right? And you're basically getting work from them, and usually, or sometimes, you might not even get to work with a partner. But at Manco, since it's so small, you do get to work with partners every day. And the partners there have been there for so long. That's another thing too. It's a firm where, even though it's on the mid-sized, smaller side, people don't leave. It's a firm that it's in the suburbs of Philadelphia, but it's a firm where, and that's not, and I don't know if you know this, but in law firms, it's not usual that people stay in there for 10, 15, 20 years unless they're making partner. Like, a lot of times they're going to a different firm, and they're doing that whole thing. And at Manco, that just didn't happen. So it was really cool to learn from them, and they have really top-notch attorneys that really do a great job on the environmental side of things. And I learned a lot. I would say the biggest takeaway from my experience there was how they're able to create a law firm that has this nurturing and kind of feedback oriented partners helping interns. And it never felt like anyone was better than anyone else. The hierarchy was gone. And while there is that hierarchy within law firms and you've got to have the partner, you've got to have the associate, you got to have those titles. No one ever felt like they were above anyone else. And I really loved that. And working in litigation, I'll say, kind of tying into your second question, I think I'm actually looking more towards the transactional side of things. And that doesn't take away from the fact that I learned so much, and I did mostly litigation this past summer. But I think over the course of legal writing at Penn, but also taking some other classes, I've realized that I want to move more into the transactional side of the law. And I'm really excited about that. I think that, there's so many courses now that law schools are offering that are just that are not so focused on litigation. One thing to note is that 10, 20 years ago, there were virtually no classes in law school that were more like focused towards people, law students that want to go into transactional. Now you have transactional drafting classes, you have um, negotiation. Like this semester, I'm taking an international business negotiations class, and people don't really get to do that often, and they did in the past. Because even during interviews, people will ask, "Well, I went to Penn, and we didn't have that back in the day." So it's cool to see that. So for me, I'm not sure where within the transactional world. I do think that mergers and acquisitions is a side that I'm looking into right now. I think that private equity is also interesting. Some of the other sides of the law that I think about too is I took bankruptcy. I really enjoyed that in my 1L year. And that can be more, a hybrid between litigation and kind of dealing with the client. And so, yeah, I'm not 100% sure yet. I think, and that's okay. Because now during my second summer associate position, I think I'll have a variety of transactional oriented kind of practice groups that I can kind of jump into and learn from.
I have to say, amazing answer. Why? Because you don't know what you want to do, and I think that's a really, really important point for people to hear, especially for myself. I recall last year I've talked about it on the podcast a bunch of times, but I was sort of scrambling trying to figure out what I wanted to do because at that point I was on track to graduate this year and then I would have went straight to law school in 3 years and then would have done another 3 years. I'm not doing that anymore. But I was freaking out and I just trying to figure out. I went on YouTube. I actually Robert Simon, who was the last person on the podcast. I used to watch his YouTube channel all the time because he would bring people from different sectors of the law, and I would watch those videos and be like, oh, maybe I want to do that, maybe I want to do that, and then I
Yeah.
reached out to a friend of mine, Nick Ronde, who was also a guest on this podcast. He went to the same high school as me. He was friends with my brother. He's at Georgetown now, and I was texting with him. And I was like, hey. What are you planning to do with the law? And he's like, oh, I have no idea. And he was in his third year. And my mind just like blew into 6 million pieces. And I was like, what am I doing? So I think that's such an important point for people to hear because a lot of the times it's like, we were talking about the sort of myths of law school before we started recording. It's a big concept that I like to do here. I love the myth busting. And that was a big myth that was busted for me. And I was like, oh my goodness. And I couldn't believe that you really didn't have to know. And it's always great to hear from another law student that
Yeah.
you don't have to know until you do it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. You really don't. I think by the second year of law school, what happens is just to kind of give you a rundown. I think by the second year, or even after your fall semester, some people will kind of make that decision about transactional versus litigation. There's more to it as well. I think that binary kind of transactional litigation, it's a big decision to make, but also you have some regulatory stuff. There's hybrids, like for example, antitrust is one that a lot of people say can be kind of a hybrid between transactional and litigation. So I think after fall semester of 1L or by the end of 1L, most people are either transactional or litigation, which I'm sure you've kind of heard before. But it's funny because oftentimes people decide to not go into litigation because they didn't like legal writing. And then they decide then the other option is transactional, right? And even within transactional or, yeah, even within transactional, there's so many different things that you can do. And you don't have, like you said, you don't have to know. And your summer associate position is geared towards trying different things. And so, like, I would say it's a little unique because Manco was very much focused on regulatory, but also litigation, not so much on the transactional side. And then for me, it's about now I have this new experience next this upcoming summer, not next summer, this summer, where I will get to experience so many other practice groups. And I think then, right after your second year summer associate position, then you kind of start narrowing down and you kind of start deciding what you're going to do. Thankfully, some firms, they even give you the option of after your summer associate, if you do get a return offer and you go back to that firm, they do a rotational program just to kind of give you an even more important thing, I think, for me when I was choosing what firm to go to, is they don't just put you in a practice group. So let's say, a lot of firms will ask you to rank the practice groups by the end of your internship. And then they put you usually they put you in your first or second position, but you're kind of grounded in that practice group. I don't want to say for the rest of your life, but sort of, hey, Nate, you matched with real estate. Like they really like you. You said you put it number one or you put it number two, wherever okay, now you're doing real estate for the rest of your life. And I think that's also not great because think about it. Like you could have gone through this 10-week internship and you did some real estate stuff. And this is not a knock on real estate, but you could have done great real estate work and you really loved it, but maybe you did 2-3 weeks of real estate. And is that really gonna reassure you that that's what you want to do for the rest of your life is real estate transactions or leasing agreements or, whatever. And so I think some firms are really smart to give rotation systems. Like some firms do like a 6-month program and you get to rotate through 3 practice groups. This is when you're already an associate, right? Or some of them do, I think some of them do like I don't know, it varies, right? Some do a year and then you do a year in a different practice group. And I just think that's great because while it makes it probably harder on them to have to do this for the associates, it allows the associates to really get to see like, okay, I did a year of employment law. Do I like this? Do I not? And if you don't, and you did it for a year, now you can jump into something different. And that to me is really important. And I think some people put any don't put any or little weight to the differences to those differences and how that can be important to your decision on which law firm to go to. I think that should be weighted, and I think people don't think about it as much. They're like, oh, okay, well, I'll do real estate or I'll do this, and they forget that there are firms out there that do give you a rotation system.
Yeah, I have actually heard of the sort of rotation system. I know another person that I talked to, they in their summer associate, it was rotated by 2 weeks, so it would be the 8 weeks, but they do 4 different things, and you could choose them as you wish, and that was another just mind-blowing thing that I learned because I was like, they really do that. So it's I found it to be kind of surprising how accommodating the law firms can be and sort of your sort of journey of figuring out what you want to do. Because at the end of the day, if they can help you, you could probably help them by coming to their law firm. Um,
Absolutely.
it's sort of the business model that they build. But finding out that that was the business model was absolutely just I was like, really? It's like they don't tell me this before I go to law school or any like it was such new news to me. I was like, I can't believe this isn't, sort of a bigger ordeal that people are sort of expressing. And it was a big reason why I started this podcast is because of those sort of ordeals of how accommodating they are, and you're not really like a chicken without your head running around. You have a sort of a little sense of direction of what you could do. So I thought that was a really, really important point that you made, and very important for the audience out there who are listening, who are still trying to figure it out, just like myself. But I want to go back to Manco with the sort of Tuesday lunch, because there's a sort of aspect to that, bringing the speakers in. It's a big part of networking and finding mentors. Can you talk about how important networking and mentorship has been for your own
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah, so I love that question because if you talk to some of my friends, it's funny because we'll be walking down like the law school and I'll see people that I know and I'll stop and then I'll see someone else that I know. And you can kind of that happens a lot in college too. But I love meeting people. I think Nate, we're very similar in the sense that I love meeting new people. I love to talk to people and I like to talk to if I haven't seen someone in a few days and I see them, I want to stop and chat if I have time. And um I think this is who I am, but when it comes to networking, I think there's some really important things that law students forget to do. And one of the biggest things for me that I did, and I just had a one L lunch last semester that I was invited to come talk to the one Ls about networking. And so one of the biggest advice that I gave them is you should definitely reach out to people that went to your either your university or people that went to Penn Law, right? And this was me talking to the one Ls, and you should reach out. You should reach out to those people that you find on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is I love LinkedIn. I think it's a great networking, but also connecting with people that maybe you haven't talked to in a while. And for me, I told them, look, there's a way to search, and I think some people don't know this, but there's a way to search on LinkedIn where you can filter, this person's at X law firm or yeah, X law firm, and which of these out of the whole law firm who went to Penn Law or who went to A&M, like particularly I did that too. And you can filter that and then you end up with, maybe 3 people. You might end up with 10 people you can reach out to. And one of the biggest things that I mentioned to the 1Ls is that look, you don't want to have to reach out to these people after you've already interviewed with them. What you want to do is you want to build these connections now. Like you want to reach out and say, hey, I'm a 1L. I'm looking into X firm. Would love to chat with you, and then when you get to your interview, when people ask you why X law firm, you have this whole story to tell. And you have, and I know that sounds really self-serving, but it's really it is obviously about building that connection with that individual person because you never know that person could be somebody that helps you get a job that sends your resume out to the HR, but that could also be a person just within your law network for the rest of your life. And so I that's my biggest piece of advice is that networking nowadays, I still recommend getting on a Zoom or getting on a call with someone, or even face to face if you're in the same city. But lawyers are really busy, so I think a lot of times it's about, hey, would you mind? Could we have a call? And that was really great for me during networking season. Um, and yeah, I think that's number one. Number two, I think we spoke about how important it is, I think, to just meet people at your law school because those are the people you're gonna want to reach out to later on in your career. But another thing too is joining organizations and joining joining organizations within the law school and joining location specific organizations. So if you want to be in DC, law schools, at least in the Northeast, have like a DC organization. If you want to go to California or if you want to go to Texas, you got the Texas Club. I think those are great ways to kind of look at firms in a regional way. If you don't want to, if you want to be in New York, there's going to be tons of law firms, but more regionally, there aren't that many, right, in comparison. And so having those organizations to join, and they have great networking conferences and they bring people like I know the DC club will bring like speakers from Williams and Connolly, which is like a DC firm, right? And so those types of things are really important too. But you know, I, I think yeah, I think those are the key points about networking is you first be genuine, I think too, right? I think lawyers know when you're calling them and it just seems very scripted and it seems like you are just trying to get a job out of this. But when you're really being genuine about trying to learn about the firm, like, hey, I noticed that your ex partner at this firm, can you tell me a little bit about why you love to be there? Or, what is maybe not that specific question, but you know what I'm saying? Like just asking questions that aren't just very much like, oh, what do you do for your work? I think that can be important and in building that network. And I think that's served me super well. I'll just give you an example. There were many firms that I interviewed with. There were many people that I reached out to prior to my interview, and they said, Ted, it's great to talk to you. I don't mind sending your resume over to HR. Like HR obviously already had my resume, but hey, I'd be more than happy to do this. And that happened for a specific firm. And so just those things that people don't think can go a long way, but they really can, and they can kind of change your trajectory or how you're accepted or not at a certain firm. But yeah, I think those are kind of my key points about networking. I can't speak enough about it. I think people that don't network do suffer a lot from it. And then just one last thing, Nate, I think like law school recruiting is so crazy, and everyone now, I think the better your grades, the less networking you have to do. I think it's probably generally true. But even then, like when you have so many people that are willing to talk to you, you should reach out and you should find the time to do that, because if you don't, I think it will make it a little bit harder for you.
Yeah, I think those are really important points. We got Ted's important points of networking on here. I It was probably what you told those 1L students, and I'm happy to further employ that message on the podcast here. But I think the most important point that you made, and something that I've been reading in a book actually, new book I just got, it's called the 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. I love it very. It's one of my favorite books now. But he sort of he went to Princeton and he went back to teach this sort of entrepreneurship class. And he sort of gave a sort of experiment or a sort of puzzle to solve for the people out there is like reach out to someone really, really famous. And he gives an example of this one student who had had like a email back and forth for like 5 months with like the Google CEO. They talked about like Zen Buddhism from China. They talked about it for weeks on end, and he basically talked about how willing these people are to answer to you, and that's something I've definitely found through my experience. How willing that people are to talk to me, especially for this podcast. Just they want to talk to you. It's not that like obviously like you said.